BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, Anne Scott James, and Denis Norden. Here's round one to test their vocabularies. 2 marks if they get these words more or less right. Beginning with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is a flageolet? Flageolet. Flageolet.
Kind of bean.
That's one thing, and it's also something else.
It's the thing you play. It's kind of flute.
Yes, that'll do. You get your 2 marks. It's a small flute, which I think you blow from the end rather than the side, if I remember rightly, and also a kind of kidney bean. It can be a stop on an organ that you play in a church. Then it's not. The meaning of the verb imbrue. I-M-B-R-U-E. Imbrue.
Imbrue, yes, that, I think, was one of the loveliest rhapsodies that Gershwin ever wrote. Imbrue.
Is it to drench?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
drench?
That's part of it.
Yes.
But surely it means a shower, doesn't it? Imber means a shower. I thought just to drench would do.
Moisten is
Can't
quite
get away
right.
with
It means to stain, but usually to stain your hands or your sword with the blood of your enemies. And this is what makes it rather nasty. 1.5 out of 2. Anne Scott James, the meaning of Pergameneous, P-E-R-G-A-M-E-N-E-O-U-S, Pergameneous. Adjective.
Oh, I think it's somebody who came from Pergamum, frankly.
Originally. Yes, that's getting a part of the distance. They made something particular in Pergamum.
Well, there's a Pergamon Press, which is a publishing company.
Did they make a dye in Pergamum?
Yes, and Denis is on the way there.
It's something to do with publishing, with books.
Yes, something with books. But we haven't quite
Something
got
to do
it.
with paper or
Yes.
ink. Parchment.
Yes.
Parchmenty.
Parchmenty it is. You've crept home. Or more like parchment. The point is that the town of Pergamum in Asia Minor was the place where they first learnt the art of preparing sheepskins so that you could write on them as parchment.
It's after they take them off the sheep.
It
Otherwise
started with that.
made it very difficult to find the page. You know.
And now, Frank Muir, what is a Lunarian? L-U-N-A-R-I-A-N, Lunarian.
Well, an Aryan is an inhabitant of, isn't he? Somebody who comes from.
Yes.
Lou, he's a sort of professional gentleman. A professional gentleman. He
might
is he
be.
not?
He might be. There isn't much evidence as to whether he's a gentleman
Is
or
it
not.
lunar? Is it lunar?
Yes.
Lunarian?
Yes.
Somebody who, from the moon?
From the moon?
An inhabitant
Yes.
of the moon? Or
Yes.
somebody who's a student of, it could be too.
That's right.
couldn't it?
You've got it absolutely dead right. Lunarian, an inhabitant of the moon, or an astronomer or observer or navigator who has rather special gen about the moon. 2 marks. Before we start round 2, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and I want the 2 women members of the team to study those quotations because at the end of the programme I shall ask them for the source of their quotation. Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, your quotation is, "So he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side." And Anne Scott James with Denis, here's yours, "The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on." And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. So to round 2, which is about legends and mythology, 2 marks for correct answers. Dilys Powell, who was Arachne? And I'm not going to spell it for you.
Arachne was a maiden.
With a spotty face.
She spun.
Yes?
She was very busy spinning.
Yes?
What, turning round? Dervish?
No, she was doing this sort of thing with a thread.
Oh.
Spinning with a thread. And somehow she got into difficulties with one of the gods. I should think
Yeah.
she said she could spin better than somebody.
Yes, quite right.
They always did that.
Yeah.
Like disc jockeys.
And the god, it was a god, not a god, a goddess. The gods didn't spin, it was a goddess. And the goddess said, "Oh, nonsense, you can't," and turned her into a spider.
Yes, absolutely right. Well done. Denis Norden, where did Pegasus come from?
Well, Pegasus was a horse.
Mm-hmm.
The trouble was with Greek legend that nothing had a proper mummy and daddy.
Yes.
In it. Either the mother was a swan or a tree or something. Or
Came from Corinth, didn't he? Didn't he come
Landed
from a
on
mountain near...
Landed on there, certainly.
Where did he start from?
Yes, this is the point.
London Airport, I should Unless it was fog-bound again. In which case he went to
let's stick to
Manchester.
the bit about Acrocorns. What happened there? But this will give you part of it, anyway.
Well, there Bellerophon met him
Yes.
and mounted him and rode him.
Yes, that's quite right.
That
1 out of 2.
doesn't seem to be what you want.
No,
No, but he's happy.
Came from the
so
sea,
don't-
possibly, did he?
he came from the sea.
Came from the sea.
1.5.
He was a seahorse.
No, he's a winged horse, and as Anne Scott James quite rightly says, eventually tamed and ridden by the hero Bellerophon, but it was when Perseus was killing the Gorgon Medusa, cut off Medusa's head, and from the blood, the winged horse Pegasus sprang. 1.5. Anne Scott James, who was the Arcadian stag, or some people say the Arcadian hind?
Ah, one of the labours of Hercules.
Yes.
It was to catch the Arcadian hind.
Yes. Do you remember what it looked like?
Well,
It had
Hercules,
sort
very
of
good looking
antlers.
chap.
Let's stick to what he was catching.
Who looked like? The hind, I presume.
Yes.
I
All
think
right.
I'm going to get much further.
Difficult. 1 out of 2. It was a stag or a hind which had golden antlers and brazen feet, and it was, I think, Hercules' 4th job or labour to try and capture it, and he pursued it for a whole year. In fact, it turned up among the Hyperboreans, who were probably the Scots, so it may even have been the stag at bay, and then got it all the way back again, or it ran back, and he wounded it with an arrow, and then managed to carry it away on his shoulders. Frank Muir, who was Andromeda's mother, and how did she finish up?
She was married to Andromeda's dad, and she finished up dead. Who's Andromeda?
Cassiopeia.
Yes. And what happened to her in the end? I think you'll both know this.
She was, she died. She either was perpetual or she's a star. Always a star.
Absolutely right. You'll get your 2 marks. She was Cassiopeia. She became a star, or rather a constellation, and so did the daughter too, Andromeda. And that's the end of the story in that case. 2 marks.
Mercifully brief.
Next round's about origins and derivations. 3 marks if members of the team can first of all define the present meaning and then give me the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Beginning with Dilys Powell, pieces of 8.
Pieces of 8. It's a kind of coin.
Yes, what kind of coin?
Spanish, doubloon.
That's it.
Out Treasure Island.
Yes, it's mentioned in Treasure Island, quite right.
Pieces of 8. What have they had?
Have a shot at its value and what it was called.
Shot its value.
It's an 1/8 of something.
Yeah.
No.
No, 8
3.
times something.
Yes, that's
8
right.
times.
Well, it depends which way you look at it.
8. 8.
Whatever it's an 1/8 of was a 64th of what I'm thinking about.
8 doubloons.
Yes, not quite. Pieces of 8 were the old Spanish silver peso, or dollar, worth 8 reals, or royals. There's some confusion as to how much they were worth, but considering what the pound's been
Why
doing,
did
that's
you ask?
not surprising. It's either worth about 4 and 6, or it's worth about 1 and 8, and I'm not quite certain which is which. And they were marked by the figure 8 to show that they were like that, and they were in use in the 17th and 18th century, and as members of the team quite rightly said, they're mentioned in Stevenson's Treasure Island. Probably they were originally pesos of 8, if you see. Denis Norden, yours quite different. The ashes.
Well, the Ashes are the results of the test match rubbers between England and Australia.
And how come?
It was some dreadful joke in Punch, wasn't
Yes?
it?
Yes, it's only the ashes of the umpire who gave
They
somebody
incinerated the first Batman.
Punch made some pompous joke about the Ashes of English cricket.
Yes, that's it. You've got that.
It's the Ashes.
We've won. We've won.
Good, thank you.
Yes, I think you get your 3. Now, Anne Scott James. Tawdry.
It means slightly sordid or dirtyish. Tawdry dress is a dress which isn't quite clean and fresh. And it comes from the Feast of St. Audrey, in my view.
Yes, it does. And what happened there?
Oh, tremendous fairgrounds and jollities. And it dates back to the finery which people used to wear at the Feast of St. Audrey.
I think that'll do. 3 marks. Something gaudy and over-ornamented, in bad taste and not worth much, and probably dirty as well, as Anne has suggested. And they had this Fair of St. Audrey in the Isle of Ely, where they sold all sorts of cheap jewellery and a particular kind of rather showy lace, which was called St. Audrey's lace. Frank Muir, sink or swim?
Sink or swim means, well, you either survive or don't survive. You get through it or don't get through it.
Yes.
And derivation, well, some things float and others don't.
Yes.
It's a test of flottance, of buoyancy, or usually of girlancy, because it was, I think, ordeal by water.
Yes. Yes, you're getting that.
I think preceded ordeal by fire.
That's it.
And it was a long way before ordeal by jury. It was when that if they found a heretic or somebody who dappled in the occult,
yes.
The test was to chuck them in the village pond.
Yes.
The theory being that if they sank, they were innocent and dead, and if they floated, they were guilty and were then put to death.
Yes.
So it was a fairly tidy way of clearing up suspects.
Absolutely right. Well done, Frank. 3 marks. Next round is initials and abbreviations. I want to know what these stand for. 2 marks, right answers. Dilys Powell, NSA.
NSA. All in capitals.
All in capitals.
National.
Yeah.
National Surgical Association.
I don't think there is one.
Skating.
What?
Skating.
Yes.
Skating.
Yes, that's right.
Association.
That'll do.
Oh.
Dennis Norden,
Steamship.
FRS.
Oh, it's the Royal Society
That's it.
thing, isn't it? Yes. Father of the Royal...
Fellow.
Fellow of the Royal Society.
Fellow of the Royal Society it is. The father of the Royal Society was Charles II, which is quite a long way back. 2 marks. Anne Scott James, FBI.
Oh, it used to be the Federation of British Industries, but that won't do anymore, will it?
No, it
'Cause
won't
it's
do
changed
anymore.
its name. It must
Yes,
be the
good.
American one. Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Country?
America.
Thank you. 2 marks. Frank Muir, VS. Capital.
Yes.
The English equivalent of the Italian indication to musicians on music, which is PP, which means very softly. It isn't often used, of course.
No, it isn't.
Short for verb sap, Latin for enough said.
Yes, it usually comes as verb sap. I've never seen VS as used for
Well,
verb
you've heard
sap.
it.
Which is,
I've
yes,
said it.
that's itself a contraction. I don't give it a
I've
double
seen it, Frank.
contraction.
I've seen it often.
Veterinary circle.
No, not society. It's the chap.
What's a
Veterinary.
surgical
Surgeon.
instrument operator?
Oh, they creep home. It's veterinary surgeon. That's the normal one. In the sport of mountaineering and rock climbing, it also stands for a very difficult climb, which is called very severe. And now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? So he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side.
It's Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan.
John Bunyan. 2 marks it is. Now, Anne Scott James. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on.
I think it's Omar Khayyam, the Rubaiyat of Persian,
Translated?
by Fitzgerald.
Yes. 2 marks it is. And I shall ask Frank and Dennis to tell me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever unlikely explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir with his quotation, so he passed over, and all the trumpets sounded for him on the other side.
There's a publisher, Mark Bonham Carter, and a couple of weeks ago he was walking along by Hyde Park in Knightsbridge, and he heard somebody calling his name. They said, "Mark, Mark, Mark." He turned round, there's nobody there. Very strange experience, and he walked on a little further. This voice said, "Mark, Mark!" And he looked down, and there at his ankles was a small dog with a hare lip. I mention this account because there's peculiar quality names have for being other things. I mean, did you know, for instance, that the Victoria and Albert Museum was named after two people? Victoria and Albert Museum was named after Frank Muir and Alastair Siam. And did you know that striptease was named after the man who brought it into this country in the closing years of the last century? Phineas Strip. He's actually spelt differently, S-T-R-I-P-P. Phineas Strip imported it from the gay shores of Gaul, from France, in Victorian times. And he used to open it up at the music hall he had there at tea time, and he used to hold little teas, and they were called strip teas, which is where it came from. And it really is a remarkable story of British pluck and guts and vim and grit. The story of how young Phineas Strip got across to Paris in order to import these dancing girls who unclothed themselves. Now, the can-can was then going the rage in Paris, Moulin Rouge, and it was being painted by Toulouse-Lautrec, but they hadn't seen it in this country. And then he heard that at Dieppe and Calais and along the coast, they were doing this striptease. And apparently they got a whole batch of petite filles, little poules. They weren't little, actually. They were dreary girls who were sort of out of work, clog chiselers. And they armed them each with a couple of enormous button hooks. And to the sound of Offenbach, they gradually unbuttoned themselves. They undid about 340 buttons. The whole thing took about 3/4 of an hour. And they took their outer clothes off and stripped down to a garment which reached from their knees to their ears of bulletproof invulnerability, made of black bombazine. This doesn't sound very exciting now, but remember, these were the days when an unclad piano leg was enough to mantle the cheek of the most worldly unmarried lady. And Phineas Strip decided he must go over and see them work this undressing thing, this undoing all these buttons to the sound of the can-can music. So he got his own composer over here who wrote him some music. It was a fellow called Seldom Bite, Herbert Seldom Bite. His name isn't remembered much now, but in those days he was the English equivalent of Offenbach. He wrote him the music. Young Phineas had the theatre, he had his theatre all ready, but how to get over to Paris, how to get across to France. He decided to swim. Immediately, he went round all the public houses and he collected all the champagne corks and he threaded them on a long piece of string and wound them all round himself and flung himself into the mighty English Channel. He floated very well. He couldn't swim because his arms were all bound up, but he was rolled over by the tide, got as far as Dover, and the tide changed, and back he was on Folkestone Beach after a very comfortable 2 hours. He realized that now he had buoyancy, but of course now he wanted propulsion. So he remembered when he was young playing with a little piece of card and a little piece of camphor stuck in the back of the card. So he rushed to a ladies' outfitter's and he bought a pair of garments which an American lady, a Mrs. Amelia Bloomer, had just made popular for cycling. These were sort of long ladies' underwear with elastic just below the knee and at the waist. He bought himself a pair of these, double strengthened the elastic, and he bought 14 gross packets of camphor balls. He poured those into his bloomers at the back, wound all his corks round him, and plunged into the mighty English Channel. Well, the camphor worked. There was a sort of fizzing and bubbling behind him, and he went sort of brrr, brrr, zigzagging all round Folkestone Harbour. Fortunately, luckily, he'd had rather large spatula feet. So by using these as a rudder, he felt he could steer himself. He got up to 9 knots, strong enough to breast any tide and any change of wind or anything in the channel, and he sped, and this time his nemesis, the harbour at Dover, no longer troubled him. And the rest is history, of course. He went over to the other side, he brought across these ladies, and they undid their 44 buttons to the delight of the country, and they are still doing it. At least not them, of course, this is some years ago, but their daughters may still be seen in Soho doing it. And in fact, this actual occurrence of him diving in with his camphor and zooming across, the actual story is commemorated by his historian, Phineas Bunyan, who wrote the story up, and the concluding sentences are so apt and so rather heroic, they pin up the whole story. The last sentence said, "And so he passed to Dover, and all the strumpets undid for him on the other side."
Well, it's lucky John Bunyan's not alive, as that's the clearest case of slander I've heard in many months. So now we go on to Denis Norden. If you remember, his quotation was, "The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on."
Well, I have a theory about inventors. I believe they dream up their invention first, and then afterwards try to work out a use for it. I mean, in medicine, there are researchers who discover a cure, then look around for a disease it will fit. I say this because of something that happened to me in this line. I woke up one morning with an absolutely brilliant notion. A revolving bowler hat. Yeah, well, I was just as impressed myself, because it is perfect, isn't it? And I rushed along to this wholesale hat manufacturers, and I said, "I have something for you which could well revolutionize the industry." I said, "You've heard of the boxer revolution. This could be the bowler revolution." I said, I will call it Norden's patent revolving titfer. You can literally have your head in a whirl. And they looked at me and they said those terribly dispiriting words, "What good is it?" And I said, "Well, you know, it goes round and round." And they said, "Yes, but what for?" And I said, "Well, you know, if it's raining, you could make it go fast and fling the rain off." They said, "Our chaps who wear bowler hats carry umbrellas." I came home terribly disappointed with my revolving bowler hat, and suddenly I had a brainwave. I knew exactly what I could use it for. For one of Mrs. Tidmarsh's fancy dress parties. Now, Mrs. Tidmarsh is our local rich person. She owns all the property from the separate shop down to the 5-minute car wash. And she gives these fancy dress parties every year on a theme. They're the worst kind of fancy dress parties. Remember the year before, it had been opera, the theme, and I've been trailing around all evening with these camellias and coughing my head off, you know. It was draggy, you know. And I suddenly realized I could use my revolving bowler hat as an all-purpose fancy dress. And the theme that year was tragedy. Had to come as something from tragedy, you know. So I just went with my revolving bowler hat, you see, and she came up to me and said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's my fancy dress." She said, "Well, it's not tragic, is it?" I said, "No, but it's moving." And it was all right, you see, I got away with that. But this year was where really it came into its own. The theme was the Far East. And what I did was, I got a torch and I taped it to my skull. And I cut a small hole in the crown of the bowler hat, so that as it went round, once every revolution, the light shone through. And that's what I went as, you see. And I got the lot of them, because they came up and they said, "What are you?" And I said, "I'm Omar Khayyam." I said, "Omar Khayyam?" I said, "Yes, just watch it. The moving tit for lights, and having lit, moves on."
Well, Edward Fitzgerald did 4 versions of Omar Khayyam, and this is clearly the 5th. And by your vote, Frank Muir wins the contest of the 2 stories, and Frank and Dilys Powell win the entire contest by 2 marks from Denis Norden and Anne Scott James. And that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and this programme comes to you from the Playhouse in London. Those taking part are Anne Scott James, Frank Muir, Dilys Powell, and Denis Norden. Round 1 tests their vocabularies. 2 marks if they get the meaning of these words roughly right. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, the meaning of the word effulgent, E-F-F-U-L-G-E-N-T, effulgent.
Oh, a cheerful word. It means shining bright.
Absolutely right. Radiant or brightly shining or sometimes sending out a beam of light, 2 marks. Frank Muir, what is Elecampane or Elecampane?
Elecampane? It's almost, it's so simple, it's hardly worth saying. Elecampane, it's like arrivederci, hasta la vista.
Ciao.
Ciao. It's an old Corsican expression. Elecampane, which means roughly, instead of mud in your eye, it's here's salamander spawn in your ear.
That's a very complicated operation.
Oh no, we think it's a plant.
Aha, you're right.
It's a plant, Jack.
You're right.
Here's a plant in your ear. What is it?
It is a plant with yellow flowers and a bitter aromatic leaf and root, used as a tonic drug, or some people, and I can't think why, use it as a sweetmeat when the flavour of the Elecampane is put into it. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, the meaning of the word, verb, obtund. O-B-T-U-N-D, obtund.
The verb?
It's a verb. That's helping you.
Oh, that's very kind. Something to do with obtuse.
Yes?
To blunt.
Yes. To blunt or to deaden, and usually it's used medically, to blunt a particular sense or faculty because it's causing you pain or for some other reason.
Oh.
Denis Norden. Denis, what is pernoctation? P-E-R-N-O-C-T-A-T-I-O-N. Pernoctation.
Pernoctation. We've got knocked. It's something that happens in the night.
Yes.
Per is through. Something that happens right through the night.
Yes.
Sleeping.
Yes. Yes.
Indigestion after having eaten Elecampane, whatever it's called.
2 marks. It means passing the night, but it had a particular sense when the other kind of night with a K in front of him was just about to be made a night. It meant this all-night vigil or passing the whole night in meditation or prayer. Passing the night. 2 marks. Well, before we start round 2, I'm going to give each team a quotation for them to write down, and the 2 women members of the team I hope will go on studying those quotations, because at the end I shall ask them where the quotations come from. So, Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is, "We shall shortly see better days." And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is, "Publish and be damned." And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their ideas of how these came to be said or written. Round 2 is about legend and mythology. 2 marks for right answers. Beginning again with Anne Scott James. Anne, what do you know of the Nemean lion and who killed it? N-E-M-E-A-N. The Nemean lion and who killed it?
Well, I should think Hercules killed
He did?
it.
Yeah.
And it was a lion in the region of Nemean,
Which is?
in the Peloponnese.
Yes, quite right. Do you remember how he killed it?
I think he strangled it, didn't he?
Absolutely right. Well done. 2 marks it is. Frank Muir, who alone recognized Odysseus when he returned home after an absence of 20 years, disguised in beggar's rags, and what happened thereafter?
Well, he staggered in and grabbed his wife and said, "There's no place like Homer." And then, and what happened afterwards? Well, whatever happens when a husband's been away for 20 years in his travels? Huh?
It happened a little before that.
His what?
His dog.
His dog?
Yes. Absolutely right.
His little doggy recognised.
Big doggy.
And
Big doggy.
Big dog recognized. Quite right.
Yeah.
And what happened after?
He licked his hand, and he patted him and tickled his ribs, and the dog's Argus's back leg. Is that Argus the name of the dog?
Argus, the dog, yes. And then you
Write more clearly.
Who's-
And he tickled Argus, and Argus's back leg went. And
Dilys, what happened to the dog? This is a bit unanswered.
I think the dog fell down dead later
He did?
on.
Absolutely right. You'll get your 2 marks. You've got everything.
Ask me another.
Odysseus, in rags, and 20 years late, was recognized by his faithful dog Argus, and the dog died of joy, or so they say, at that point. 2 marks. Dilys Powell, who was Acis, A-C-I-S, who was Acis, whom did he love, and what happened to him as the result of that love?
Acis.
Acis.
Galatea.
Yes?
Galatea. He loved Galatea.
Yes, and what happened to him? Poor chap.
Oh dear, he fell down dead.
Well, not as spontaneous as all that.
He was killed by somebody. as a
Killed
result.
by?
Must have been one of those gods.
Acis was a very handsome Sicilian shepherd who fell in love with Galatea, the milk-white lady, and she with him. But she was loved by a horrible monster called Polyphemus, the Cyclops. And in his rage, he crushed Acis with a great rock. And then his blood came gushing out, and Galatea kindly changed it into the river Acis, which runs at the foot of Mount Etna. Denis Norden, who were the Napaeae? N-A-P-A-E-A-E. Napaeae.
They had 2 sets of AEs on the end.
That's right.
They must have been feminine then.
Yes, they were.
Napaeae was the Mount Olympus nappy service, actually.
No, not all that far wrong, Dennis.
Well, they were female Latin. They were Roman They were female in Latin. What they were in Greek.
Well, Greek
One
would
can
be
only
better,
conjecture,
yes.
but,
Greek would be better.
Greek, yes. They were Greek females.
Yep.
I think
Mortal
that's
or
my
not?
terminus.
Mortal or not?
Oh, immortal.
All right, 1 out of 2. I think this is a very hard
nymphs,
question.
were they?
They were
Yes,
nymphs.
carry on.
Nymphs on one of the mountains.
There were various categories of nymphs. And the Napaeae were the nymphs of the glens, just as the naiads were the nymphs of running water, and dryads were nymphs of the trees and so on. And then next round we have a round of Dickens questions, 2 marks again. Anne Scott James, what were the names of David Copperfield's 2 wives, successively?
Oh, the first one was the silly little one, Dora,
Yes?
and the second one was the even more maddening one to me, Agnes.
Do you remember their surnames? Dora, a bit difficult. Never mind, 1.5.
Agnes de Mille.
Dora Spenlow and Agnes Wickfield. Frank Muir, whom did Pip marry in Great Expectations, and who was her father?
Pip married Emma one afternoon.
Not quite Emma. You got the right start and end. It's not quite Emma.
No, her father was Megwitch, the convict.
Yes, quite right.
She was a stepdaughter, wasn't
Yes.
she?
Pip, in Great Expectations, married Estella, who was the adopted daughter of Miss Havisham, but really the daughter of the ex-convict Abel Magwitch.
Oh, memory.
Dilys Powell, what were the names of the twin brothers who employed Nicholas Nickleby, and whom did Nicholas marry?
Well, not one of the brothers.
The brothers were the Cherubal brothers.
Quite right.
Cherubal brothers.
And do you remember his...
We married.
the one he married?
Emma.
No, I didn't.
The employers of Nicholas Nickleby were the Cherubal brothers, Charles and Edwin Cherubal, and he married Miss Madeline Bray. Now, Denis Norden, can you give me the names of 4 criminal types in Oliver Twist?
Bill Sykes.
Yep.
Fagin.
Yeah.
The Artful Dodger.
Yes, that's 3.
Nancy.
Nancy, that was
Yes.
it. Yes, that's all right. I would even have allowed Oliver because they made him into a criminal for a bit.
Oh, I never thought of that, yeah.
2 marks. Next round is about origins and derivations. 3 marks this time. If members of the team can define first of all, the present meaning, and then give me the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Anne Scott James, what is a ha-ha and why so called?
Well, it is a kind of a ditch separating a park or garden from the road or the public land outside.
Yes,
But it's a shallow ditch.
purpose being,
To keep the animals out, I think, wasn't it?
partly, that's half of it. There's
And the people in.
Ha! That's a splendid idea. Now, there was a visual reason for it as well.
But no, to make it look prettier.
Yes, give you a good view.
Mm-hmm. And why so called?
I suppose because people fell in it.
That's it. Yeah.
It can't be.
I think 2.5.
Oh, no, look here, Jack. It was so brilliant.
That's near enough. I can't give you quite 3 because you've missed one particular point. It was a sunken trench or moat, preventing animals, as Anne quite rightly said, from getting into the garden of a big house. But the point was that your eye, as you looked out from the French windows, didn't see the interruption caused by the moat. It looked as though the countryside was continuous into the park, although the animals couldn't get at you. And it's said that it was so called because guests every now and then made the ejaculation ha-ha when they didn't spot it was there, and as Denis said, fell foremost into it. Frank Muir, to what does the expression to lead apes in hell refer?
According to John Ray, it was dying a virgin. It was the fate of those ladies who died virgins.
Yeah. At what time? I think you have quoted the...
Well, John Ray was
1670.
1670, so it's presumably 17th century and backwards.
Yes. Well done. That's your 3 marks. In Elizabethan times and probably earlier, it was the belief, and you find it in lots of books and plays of the period, that any woman who died a spinster would after death be condemned to be a leader of apes in hell. So it was a very uncomplimentary thing to say. And if you look at the Taming of the Shrew, there's one unfortunate girl who's in love with the hero who says, I must dance barefoot on her wedding day, and for your love to her, lead apes in hell. In other words, she didn't get the boy. 3 marks. Dilys Powell, the derivation of the word heathen.
Oh, it means an unbeliever, a non-religious, an unchristian person.
And originally?
But I think it means something to do with people who live sort of outside cities.
Yeah,
in
the Maquis.
Yes, in the Maquis, yes.
And why?
Beyond the pale,
Yeah.
kind of thing. Beyond the religious pale.
They
That's it.
hadn't, yes.
Or bucket.
That'll do. That's all right. Today, it means historically someone who is neither of the Christian nor the Jewish nor the Muslim faith. Also a person nowadays with no accepted religious beliefs at all. But right back in Roman times, they used a similar word, pagan, to refer to people because they lived in the country or on the heath and a long way away from civilized towns, didn't know much about either law or order or gods or religion. So they were looked on as not very much more than animals. And that, in Old English and Old German, became heath dwellers, who became heathens, or were heathens. Sorry, 3 marks. Denis Norden, Irish stew.
Oh, it's a shame after being so high-flown.
Yes, simple stuff they keep for you.
Well, it's something you eat. It's a dish of vegetables and potato and lamb.
And what?
Best end of neck.
Best end of what?
Neck of lamb.
Best end of neck of lamb.
And onions.
And onions.
But why Irish?
Why Irish indeed? At a wild, imaginative soar of the mind, presumably because it was eaten in Ireland.
Yeah? And it wasn't quite as nice there. This is the point.
No, it wasn't quite as... because they had the potato famine.
You and Anne, between you, are fairly accurate to describe what it is now, so I'll give you 1.5 marks. But this was originally known not only as Irish stew, but as poverty stew, because though over this more prosperous side of the Irish Channel, it was, as Anne says, assorted meats mixed up with certain vegetables. In Ireland, they couldn't afford the meat, and when visitors went to the country, they found the stew was almost entirely potatoes and onions only, and practically no meat at all. And that was called Irish stew. 1.5. And now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier on the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation, which was, we shall shortly see better days?
Well, it was said by an optimist.
Well, not entirely.
Well, somebody, I should think it was said by a general who was in straits and was trying to sort of give his men a bit of a push on and a build-up.
No, I don't think you're going to get it,
Nor
and I
do
think
I.
it's an extremely hard one. It was written by a woman playwright called Aphra in the 17th century, in a play called The Roundheads, and it goes like this: a brave world, sir, full of religion, knavery, and change, we shall shortly see better days. Sorry. And now, Dilys Powell, the origin of your quotation, which was, publish and be damned.
Said by the Duke of Wellington. He was threatened by Harriet Wilson with some kind of blackmail. He said, publish and be damned.
Yes, I'm quite right. The Duke of Wellington, threatened by some scandalous memoirs. It's attributed to the Duke of Wellington. Whether he actually said it or not, one doesn't know. 2 marks. And now I'm going to ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Denis Norden with his quotation, we shall shortly see better days.
I very much want your help with this. It's a game. It's a new game, which I'd be awfully glad if you'd sort of spread and make it into a craze. It's a game called Who's the Welshman? And it's very easy. You say it like, who's the Welshman who plays a stringed instrument? And somebody says, I don't know. You say, dilute. You see, who's the Welshman who never wears a shirt? Divest. You see, it's very easy to get the hang of. Who's the Welshman who drives a lorry? Die Van. Why I'm foisting this upon you is because it's rather urgent, rather desperate as far as I'm concerned. It started last night. I was obliged to stay late in the office. Well, when I say I was obliged to stay late, I didn't mean to stay late, but I've got one of these pencil sharpeners screwed to my desk, you know, the sort with a little handle, which has a little dial in front of it, which has different sized holes for the various diameters of pencil. About 5:30, I know why the thought occurred to me, but it did, to see which of these holes my finger would fit into. By about 10:30, the building was deserted, and I was thinking seriously about amputating when the phone rang. And I picked it up with the other hand, and a voice said, "I shall be there in 2 minutes, man. You will recognize me because I shall have a leak in my hat." And rang off. I thought it was a rather odd message to receive when you've got your finger in a pencil sharpener. In his hat, I thought, you know, it's a funny place to have a leak. But sure enough, about 5 minutes later, the door opened, and in came this little man who did have this strange sort of vegetable in his trilby. And he said to me, "Are you the Welsh one?" And I said, "What Welsh one?" He said, "One of you is a Welsh one." So I said, "Well, I'm not a Welsh one, and I'm sure Frank isn't. He may be an English one, but..." He said, "One of you is Welsh." He said, "We heard it from the wireless. Muir and Morgan." No, I said, "Muir and Norden." "Damn," he said. "Intelligence got it wrong again. How can you run a revolution when your intelligence service gets it wrong every time?" I said, "What revolution are you running?" He said, "Welsh Nationalist Party we are. We shall overcome." I said, "You really belong to the Welsh Nationalist Party?" He said, "Yes," he said, "and it is jokes we want." I said, "I'm afraid." He said, "You realize," he said, "the Welsh are the only minority that doesn't have rotten jokes about them." He says, "Jewish jokes, Scottish jokes, elephant jokes. Surely a Welshman is more valuable than an elephant?" I said, "Well, not if you're another elephant." He didn't think it was very funny either. He took out this knife and he said, "You will write jokes about Welshmen and flood the country with them, you will. And if you don't, the penalty will be swift and painful." Well, as I say, this was last night, when you can't get very far with your finger stuck in pencil sharpener. And as I say, the best I could do in the short time available was this game of who's the Welshman, you know, who's the Welshman whose clock is always slow? Die late. Who's the Welshman who runs the church? Director. I know they're terribly primitive, which is why I want your help. And if you do, I can assure any Welsh nationalists who are listening that we shall see better dies.
Well, I like Muir and Morgan so much better, I intend to use that form of address exclusively in future. So, Muir, publish and be damned.
I do think it's a bit sickening. I'm speaking as a scholar and a historian now, when a man of John Longland's erudition here doesn't know whether, in fact, the Duke of Wellington said this or not. He said it's attributed to the Duke of Wellington. I think this is a great shame on a splendid chap, a chap who did a lot for England. And I've been doing researches into the Duke of Wellington's history, and I found some rather surprising things about him. That expression, up guards an atom, attributed to the Duke of Wellington, Waterloo. In fact, he didn't say it at Waterloo at all. He said it at the Duchess of Richmond's ball on the eve of Waterloo when the ladies entered. But during the Battle of Waterloo, something rather odd occurred to the Duke. He found out that his adjutant was a woman. His adjutant was Lieutenant Harry Twilson, apparently. But one night, when they were dancing, and he noticed that his adjutant was dancing backwards. So he thought, that's odd. That's the way a woman dances. So he confronted his adjutant, and by golly, it wasn't Harry Twilson at all. She confessed that her name was actually Harriet Wilson. She was a chorus girl in a musical show called Goodbye Dolly, I Must Leave You. And her lover had been taken for a soldier. He'd accepted George III's shilling and joined up with the Duke's forces, and she'd disguised herself as a man, enlisted, and was now the Duke's adjutant. Well, so there she was, a girl in the Duke's army. She'd been there for about 6 months. Nobody had given her away. Why would they give her away? And the Duke took her into his tent. He thought, he's a very kind man, he thought that the rough soldier's tongue wouldn't fit her ladylike ear. And he invited her into his tent, just invented by Mr. Bell, and thereby docking the clangor of his life. He was, as they say in the papers, constant companions with Harriet Wilson, all during the campaign. Well, the campaign finished. He was made, as you know, the Duke of Wellington. He became Prime Minister. And standing outside his home, number 1 Piccadilly, Apsley House, given to him by the nation, actually by the Westminster City Council. It was the first council house ever. Suddenly a figure came up to him, a figure he half recognized, a dumpy, rather middle-aged, slightly rattled lady. And she said, "Do you remember me, Arthur? Do you remember me? I'm Harriet Wilson." He said, "Oh, yes, madam." And she said, "I'm writing my memoirs, and I'm going to tell all about you and me. Everybody knows I was your friend. I'm going to reveal to the world every Sunday exactly the sort of woman I am." He stared at her, this aloof, rather grand, very old English gentleman. And she said, "Pay me 200 guineas in gold, and I will suppress my memories." And he looked at this old thing with a fat tummy and the mauve, purplish grog blossom on her cheeks. And that's when he said the famous line, "We can see the sort of woman you are, madam. Purplish and betummed."
I wanted to know where John Masefield got that wonderful man-woman character in the Midnight Folk, Twiney Pricker or Piney Twicker or whatever it was. And by your vote, Denis Norden just wins the contest of the 2 stories, and that leads us, nevertheless, to a final score in which Dilys Powell and Frank Muir win by 5 marks, and it also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, Anne Scott James, and Denis Norden. Here's round one to test their vocabularies. 2 marks if they get these words more or less right. And we begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is a Manitou? M-A-N-I-T-O-U. Manitou.
Manitou. Mini.
No, very maxi.
Mini, yes, I was thinking of Mini Ha-Ha.
Oh, yes, that's a better line.
Manitou, it's something in Hiawatha.
Mm-hmm. It's a good or evil spirit worshipped by certain tribes of American Indians. The Algonquins invented the word, and it can be a fetish or a thing with supernatural powers. Pegner, what is a Loganstone?
Loganstone. Well, you find many of these in the flesh of a loganberry. It's a kind of hard pip.
It's a heavy stone, or usually a rock, because it often weighs hundreds of tons, that's so delicately balanced because when the ice ran away, it was left poised on top of another bit of rock, so that in spite of it being of enormous size and weight, a child can rock it. And it comes from an old dialect word, logging, which means rocking. Now, Dilys Powell, this is different. What's the meaning of nux vomica?
Nux vomica comes from a nut.
Yes, quite right.
Comes from a nut.
Yes.
It's a nut which induces vomiting.
And the main drug which it contains?
Arsenic.
Old race.
1.5 out of 2. It's the fruit of an East Indian tree from which strychnine is obtained, and you used to be able to get it when I was a boy in what you call homeopathic doses, and I thought it meant being sick by night.
I never had none.
The sick bit's all right, but the nut bit is right, as you yourself said. Now, Denis Norden, what is a lavation?
I shall resist the temptation and shall give attempt a serious explanation in lieu. It's a kind of a posh word for washing.
Yes.
It's,
absolutely right, a highfalutin word for washing. Well, before we begin round 2, I give each team a quotation to write down, and the 2 women members of the team will, I hope, go on studying those quotations throughout the programme, because at the end I shall ask them the source of the quotation. And Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, your quotation is not lost, but gone before. And Dilys Powell and Frank Muir, yours is half a loaf is better than no bread. And then at the end of the programme I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. Now, round 2 is about legends and mythology, for a possible 2 marks. Anne Scott James, who was Nibelung?
This is a cheat. I thought we were going to have classical mythology. It's German.
German or Scandinavian?
And Nibelung had a ring. The Wagnerian story, but there must have been a lot of Nibelungs. Isn't the Wagnerian hideous cycle called the Ring of the Nibelungs?
That's right. I want a particular one.
Well, he was a German king who started a great deal of trouble with Rhine maidens and Siegfrieds and rings.
Yes, he was the king of this race of Scandinavian dwarfs who lived in Nibelheim, or the land of mists and darkness, and this was the basis of the story of the Ring, on which Wagner based his opera cycle. 1 out of 2. Frank Muir, who in German legend was the Knight of the Swan? K-N-I-G-H-T. The Knight of the Swan.
Oh, in Greek mythology, it's a night Leda will never forget. In German, the Knight of the Swan, my lady companion is writing. Is it Isn't that opera, is it?
I think so.
The one about the contented cow. Lohengrin. We're under the impression that it's Lohengrin.
Yes, he was.
By Richard Makepeace Wagner.
Yes, he was Lohengrin, who was the son of Sir Percival, or Parsifal, and he arrived at Antwerp in a skiff drawn by a swan to champion Elsa, who was being done out of her inheritance by Ortrud, the sorceress, and Tetramond. And the swan comes to take Lohengrin back, the point where he wants to get to, and he then turns it from being a swan into Elsa's brother, Godfried, who'd been forced to assume the form of a swan, again by this horrible sorcerer. All right, Dilys Powell, back to classical mythology. How did Odysseus become reunited with his wife after 20 years of absence on his part, and what was her name?
Her name was Penelope.
Mm-hmm.
He turned up looking rather shaggy.
Yes.
And nobody recognized him because he'd been away for a very long time.
But he walked in and looked round and said, "There's no place like Homer."
There were about 10 or 12 suitors for the hand of Penelope.
100.
100. I've just...
10, 12, 100.
And Penelope, instead of accepting them, said, when I've finished weaving this woof, or whatever it is, I will accept you. And every day she wove a bit, and every night she unwove it.
Yes, yes.
And Odysseus challenged the suitors to pull or draw or shoot a bow.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them could, and he drew it and shot the lot.
Jolly good.
Jolly good thing, too.
Well done, Dilys. Neither Homer nor I can beat that story, and you get your 2 marks. Now, Denis Norden, how did the Hellespont get its name? Hellespont.
Oh.
Dilys knows this as well.
Fell in.
She fell in and said, "What?" she fell in. See, pont is French for bridge. And there was no bridge.
No bridge at all.
There. So she said, "Where the hell is the bridge?" And it was Gallicized into Hellespont.
Half a mark for inventiveness. There's a girl called Helle, and she had a brother called Phrixus.
She didn't have a friend called Pont.
Frankly, no. She had a brother called Phrixus, and they were both to be sacrificed to Zeus because of some terrible intrigues of their father, King Athamas, who had taken a second wife or concubine called Ino. And therefore their mother, who was the goddess of the clouds, Nephele, rescued them, took them away and put them on a golden-fleeced ram, which flew away with them. But unfortunately, Helle hadn't got an absolutely sound seat on the ram, and she fell off and fell into this bit of the sea, and this was called Helle's Sea.
That was called time. Ramsgate.
I give up. Next round is the who, why, how, and what department, and 2 marks for correct answers. Anne Scott James, who in what book by what author took great care of his mother, though he was only 3?
It's A.A. Milne.
Yes.
George?
Weatherby George Dupree.
That's it. And the book?
When we were very young.
Yes, quite right. 2 marks you get. Frank Muir, who sang "You'll Come a Waltzing Matilda with Me" in the song Waltzing Matilda, and what was he doing at the time?
It was sung by Peter Dawson, an Australian tenor. At the time, he was earning about 150 nicker.
That's an answer, but not the one I want.
Do you wish interior evidence?
Yes, I wish interior evidence, please.
Well, once a jolly swag man sat upon his billy bong under the shade of a coolabah tree, and he sang and he sat as he waited for his Billy Boyle. "Won't you come?"
Next thing we get
polkaing, military 2-stepping Matilda with me.
jolly good, Frank. The only thing is he'd have got awfully wet if he'd actually sat in his billy bar.
Well, it's a stream, isn't it? that was poetic licentiousness on my part.
I think we've got some Australian ladies in the audience.
Carries it all in a rolled-up thing.
That's it, absolutely right. 2 marks it is. A swag man, a chap who carries all, as Frank says, all his luggage in a swag over his back, camped by a billy bog under the shade of a coolibah tree, and he sang as he sat and waited for his billy boy.
Won't you come walk?
All sing Matilda with me. Now, Dilys Powell, who said, there's a sucker born every minute?
Well, it wasn't W.C. Fields, it ought to have been. Somebody in the audience is saying Phineas T. Barnum.
And you're quite right.
I think it must have been Frank.
Yes. And what was his job?
He was a showman.
Yes, all right, good enough. It's attributed to, it's not quite certain whether he actually ever did say it, to Phineas T. Barnum of Barnum and Bailey, the American circus concern. Now, Denis Norden. 3 books are quoted by Dr. Johnson in the following statement, and what are they? And here it is. Was there ever yet anything written by mere man that was wished longer by its readers, excepting?
Oh, I don't know. I think one of them would be vaguely religious in tone.
Yeah.
Pilgrim's Progress.
Yes, quite right. There's one of them. Well done.
Now, the other two.
The others are not religious.
Oh, Jack, we'll be here
Never mind.
all night.
The 3 are Pilgrim's Progress, Don Quixote, and Robinson Crusoe.
Don
And
Quixote
before
couldn't
Frank
be long.
interrupts, he couldn't quote Boswell's Life of Johnson because it hadn't been written at that point. On our round of origins and derivations, 3 marks for, first of all, giving me the present meaning, and then giving me the origin and derivation of the following words. Anne Scott James, digitalis. Digitalis.
Well, it is a foxglove.
Yes, it is, but in common use...
It's a medicine for the
right.
heart.
Yes. And
It's
why...
made out of a foxglove.
Yep. Digitalis is simply a Latin medical name for the German word Fingerhut, which the Germans being rather literal types, it means a finger hat, which means a thimble, or if you like it, a glove. And that's a much better name, Fingerhut, than foxglove, which I never have understood at all. But digitalis is the medicine, and as Anne quite rightly said, it is a heart stimulant. 3 marks. Now, Frank Muir. The present meaning and derivation of the lion's share.
The lion's share means the greater part of 2 parts of a whole. And presumably, I mean, this may seem a bizarre explanation to you, but presumably the lion being... What are you writing? the lion being the king of the forest.
I don't know.
Would, if there's any kind of gazelle lying there, dead, if any 2 animals are eating it, the lion's going to get more than the other animal. And it probably comes from Aesop's fables.
Yes, it does.
That poor
There's
chap.
one explanation, anyway.
Yes.
2 out of 3, I think. Present meaning, lion's share, it means all or nearly all. And there are 2 explanations. One is that lions hunt in packs with the lionesses, which Frank left out, accompanying them.
There's mine and his.
And after the kill, the lionesses hold back, and the gents have first go. And then when the lionesses eat, the lions guard them while they're eating. I mean, it's shall the ladies join us rather than shall we join the ladies.
Well, that would be the lioness's share, surely.
Sorry?
That would make it the lioness's share.
No, the first lot goes to the lion, the he.
And he gets more.
Yeah.
Well,
hence,
probably,
hence,
yes.
What he wants.
hence the main course.
Dilys Powell, bath chair.
Bath chair.
You know that.
Bath chair is a
Have a bath
is
in
a
it.
chair on wheels.
How many wheels?
3.
3.
Yes.
3, thank you. Frank. 3. And it's used at seaside resorts.
Such as
for-
Bath. They hold up and down the terraces in Bath
Yes.
when they're taking
Yes.
the waters, 18th
right.
century.
Bath.
Between you, you've got that. 3 marks.
Frank knows.
It's a chair mounted on 3 wheels used for transporting invalids, and it got its name because it was first used at Bath, which had long been frequented by invalids who went there for the hot springs and the waters. Now, Denis Norden, Batman.
a soldier's servant?
Yes.
An officer's servant?
Yes, yep. I mean, how did it come to be called Batman?
Well, when they went to a inn or hostelry, it was his job to clear the bats out of the bedroom before the officer arrived.
I will accept that.
Splendid ideas, and I give you 1.5 marks out of 3. He was the officer's servant come valet in the army, and originally a batman was the soldier in charge of a bart horse, which was the French for a pack horse, and he carried the baggage for the officer that he was looking after. And now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Anne Scott James, can you give me the origin of your quotation? Not lost, but gone before.
Well, I should think it was some Victorian sentimentalist.
Well, Victorian certainly. It was Caroline Elizabeth Sarah Norton writing this poem, Not Lost, but Gone Before, which is very odd. For death and life in ceaseless strife beat wild on this world's shore, and all our calm is in that balm, B-A-L-M, not lost, but gone before. But there is an alternative version which begins, your baby has gone down the plug hole. Well, now, Dilys Powell.
Not lost, but gone below.
Now, Dilys Powell, will you give the origin of your quotation, which was, half a loaf is better than no bread?
Anonymous.
It isn't, I don't think.
No?
Something very like it is mentioned in Hesiod, which takes it about as far back as anybody cares to go. But John Haywood in 1546 said, throw no gift at the giver's head, better is half a loaf than no bread.
Never heard of it.
Sorry, no more. And now I shall ask Denis and Frank to give me their explanations of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Denis Norden and his quotation, not lost, but gone before.
Well, we have this young couple living next door, charming young couple, very much in love, blissfully happy, and their names are Jules and Jim. Jim is short for Jemima, actually. She's a lady. And a couple of years ago, we were talking about Christmas presents, and they said, what can we buy for a very rich uncle of ours? We're his sole surviving relatives, and he's very old and very rich, and he can hardly walk. And I said, well, why don't you buy him a tin of high-gloss wax floor polish? And a few months passed, and they came out and they said, do you mind if we put something in your deep freeze? And I said, no, for how long? They said, 30 years. And I said, I beg your pardon, as one would. And they explained that this uncle of theirs had seen a program on television whereby people who want to can be frozen while they're still alive and sort of stored indefinitely. And this uncle had elected to do this and had actually had himself frozen and had told this young couple, Jules and Jemima, that he would rather like them to look after him while in the frozen state, rather than go to strangers, as they say. But they only had this very small fridge. And we have this big, deep freeze. And so they said, can we store him in there? You see, he's very tidy. They wrapped in sort of muslin. So I said, yes, with pleasure. So we put him in there and left him there. Sort of forgot about him, and because he'd arranged that as long as they stored him, he would have them sent a monthly check, which would more or less take care of them, you see. So it was in their interest to sort of keep him as long as possible. And as I say, we just put him in, I say forgot about him. We didn't actually forget it. My youngest child went in to get a bottle of milk. I remember she was on tranquilizers for about 3 months afterwards, kept saying, you know, there's a frozen man in the fridge. And I said, he may be a frozen man to you, dear, but to the couple next door, he's iced lolly. And you know, we kept him there, and it was really no trouble at all. I mean, I wasn't putting myself out in any way, and it was going very well, except there's a thing called power cuts that we have in England, and there was a kind of banging on the door of the deep freeze, and I realised that he was defrosting a bit, you know. I went in, and sure enough, he was twitching, you know, so I turned the regulator up, you know, and he soon got him nice and frozen again. But I said to the people, you know, this won't do because we get another power cut, you know, bang goes the monthly check. And I said, why don't you take him along to the local butcher's, you see, because he's got this big refrigerated room. And they have their own generator there, so no trouble with power cuts. It was fine, you know. That was very easily arranged, actually, because they kind of put a coat hanger through his shoulders, and they've got all these hooks on the wall, you know. And he hung about there for quite a time. And they went to inspect him, you know, every so often. And I got this panic phone call one day, you see. What's the matter? He said, we're at the butcher's, we've lost Uncle. I said, come on. And I rushed round there, you see. And there on this hook was this long slab wrapped in muslin. And I said, well, there. And he said, no, look in it. And I looked in it. And it was the carcass of a cow. I remembered that this butcher had taken on this new assistant who was somewhat short-sighted. And I said, well, you haven't actually lost Uncle. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, not lost, but gone for beef.
And now we go back to Frank Muir, and if you remember, his quotation was, half a loaf is better than no bread.
A man came up to the street, a man came up to me in the street the other day, and he said, what is the most successful joke you've ever told? And I said, successful joke I've ever told was when somebody said to me, why don't you take a job as a bank clerk? And I said, no, as you've probably gathered, I don't make a very good teller. For the circumstances, to put that story in its true perspective, I have to go back a few years. Now I'm 47 and I've let myself go, as far as looks are concerned. You know, the most you could say about me now was distinguished, you know, charming, sexy, but then, when I go back to the time when I first really fell in love, I was a knockout. She was small and blonde. Eventually, I got to the stage of asking her mother's permission to marry her. I made an appointment with my, I hoped, mother-in-law, Madame McIrvin. Her mother was a widow. Her mother was French. And I walked in, and I said rather gaily, what ho, madame? Hoping to combine in the one sentence a kind of suave, social ease, coupled with the conveyance that I had a knowledge of her own tongue. What ho, madame? I said. She said, can you support my daughter? Now that came down the pitch a bit bumpily. I said, what, if she faints, playing for time, you see. I said, no, I haven't got a steady job. So I said, oh, yes, I write scripts with Denis Norden. We write a show called Take It From Here. And she said, and are the prospects good? I said, yes, the series goes on for another 3 weeks. And she said, what happens after that? So I said, well, we'll get another job, you know, or the series will come back. And she said, what do you do? So I said, well, our job is to make people laugh. And she said, well, show me. So I said, you mean demonstrate how to make people laugh? And she said, yes, well, show me how you do it, make me laugh, you know, then I will have confidence in your ability to support my daughter. So I said, well, this chap was here, this little chap, he was lying in bed in this private room at the hospital, and the nurse knocked on the door and came in, and she stripped off his pyjamas, and she rubbed him all over from head to toe in surgical fluid. Then she dusted him front and back all over with talcum powder and said, before I take you down to the surgery, is there anything you'd like to know? And he said, yes, why did you bother to knock? My mother-in-law said she was probably afraid that there was somebody in the room with him. Yes, I said, yes, very possibly true. And she said, why don't you get a good, safe job in a bank? And I said, well, as you probably gathered from the last few minutes, I wouldn't make a very good teller. And a sort of slight semi-chuckle broke from her, and I'd won the day, and I'd been happily married for 18 years. And that's the story of my most successful joke. You might think, it wasn't all that successful, but it was. I mean, only a demi-chuckle, but as the man said, half a laugh is better than no bride.
I just couldn't see how Frank was going to get his quotation in. But by your vote, Denis Norden wins the contest of the two stories, and he and Anne Scott James win the entire contest by 2.5 marks from Frank Muir and from Dilys, and that also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words. Those taking part are Dilys Powell, Frank Muir, Anne Scott James, and Denis Norden. And here's round one to test their vocabularies. 2 marks if they can give me the meaning of these words approximately right. We begin with Dilys Powell. Dilys, what is the meaning of flump? F-L-U-M-P, flump. And it could be either a verb or a noun.
Flump? It means to flop with a slump.
Yes, I think you get by on this. Means to move or to fall heavily or to throw somebody down or something down with a dull thumping noise. It can be a noun, can be a verb, and it's obviously an attempt at imitating the noise. Now, Denis Norden, what's the meaning of impiteous? I-M-P-I-T-E-O-U-S. Impiteous.
Impiteous. Well, I'll tell you, Jack, when you ask us a question that we don't know, and you say, well, I'll give you half a mark for trying. Anne turns to me, and in her real voice, she says, I'd rather have him atus than have him piteous.
Well, you're jolly nearly there.
Something to do with having no pity, I
That's
think.
absolutely right. 2 marks. Now, Anne Scott James. And what is slob ice? S-L-O-B, slob, hyphen, ice. slob, ice.
You've pronounced it wrong, Jack. I've been there.
Oh, jolly good.
It's a Yugoslav small little seaport, and it should be pronounced Slobice.
That's a very daring thought.
Our yacht put in there one day.
Yes, a yacht wouldn't like doing this, what this really means.
Well, it's a kind of ice, then, we presume.
A slob ice.
A Knickerbocker glory.
Yeah.
In Yugoslavia. I stick to my part of the...
Eaten in a cinema, in the dark, actually, which is so that when you come out, you find flavour of the month all down your lapel.
Or do you...
Well, should be.
It's a Czechoslovak Knickerbocker glory.
I should lay off this idea of eating.
Well, it's a kind of ice.
Exactly, it's a moron glacé.
Look, we can't do better than that. We can't, no, that's it.
It's a name for floating ice mixed with snow, and you don't find it in Yugoslavia, at least not very much. You're much more likely to find it off Newfoundland. Rather like floe ice or cat ice, that kind of ice, not the edible type. Frank Muir, what's the meaning of lapidify? L-A-P-I-D-I-F-Y, lapidify.
It's not a word you hear all that frequently. Lapidify. It's an imperative. It's a word you shout to make all possible speed, because lapid is the Chinese word for fast. So lapidify means make all rapidity.
Turn to a stone. Turn to a small stone.
We think it's to do with stonifying, being turned into a piece of stone.
That's absolutely dead right. Lapidify means to make into stone or to become stone, as when you see a Gorgon's head or something and stop being alive and become a stone monument. Lapidify. Now, before we begin round two, I give each team a quotation for them to write down, and then I want the two women members of the team to go on studying those quotations, because at the end I shall ask them where those quotations come from, their source. Beginning with Dilys, Powell and Frank Muir, here's your quotation. He jests at scars that never felt a wound. And Anne, Scott, James and Denis, here's yours. Rather bear those ills we know than fly to others we know not of. And then at the end of the programme, I shall ask Frank and Denis to give me their idea of how these came to be said or written. Next round's about verse and poetry, and what I do is to give each member of each team a quotation and ask them to complete it with a line or two following. 2 marks if they can finish off the quotation, and 2 marks for correctly naming its source. Beginning with Dilys Powell. If parts allure thee, think how Bacon shined, the wisest, brightest, meanest of mankind, or ravished with the whistling of a name. I want one more line.
He is no better, he is much the same. Shiny bacon, I've never heard that one.
It rhymes.
Let's have the author first. You can get
18th century.
Yes.
Should we try Pope?
Yes.
Try Pope.
Yep.
Pope.
It is Alexander Pope, yes.
Alexander Pope.
Yes.
Is this the Dunciad?
No. Essay on Man. If parts allure thee, think how Bacon shined, the wisest, brightest, meanest of mankind, or ravished with the whistling of a name, see Cromwell, damned to everlasting fame.
Well,
now, Denis Norden. I was promised on a time to have reason for my rhyme, from that time unto this season. And one more line.
Then a rhyme and reason.
That's right. Do you remember who did it?
That was sheer guesswork.
That's jolly good.
No, I don't. I'm not.
Well, it is a very difficult one. There is a sort of pendant to this.
Oh, I like
when
things
that
with
rather sort of awkward bureaucrat, the first Lord Burleigh, William Cecil, said, "What? All this for a song?" Does that help?
Oh, yes. Now, this was something to do with the poet, it wasn't the poet laureate, but it was one of the first writers to be given a state grant.
That's it.
Now,
Remember who it was?
Who was? Spencer.
Yes, well done.
Well done.
3 out of 4, because I did give quite a lot of help. I was promised on a time to have reason for my rhyme. From that time unto this season, I received nor rhyme nor reason. 3 out of 4. Now, Anne, Scott, James. Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy, how's your soul?
But it's good old...
Yes,
yes,
this is Kipling, surely.
Yes. No, I know the other bit.
Say our bit again. Tommy this,
it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy, how is your soul?
Boot inspection,
yes. Oh, is it some other role?
Yes.
Is it some other role?
No. Roll is the end, but it isn't your kind of roll.
Oh, it's your roll that's
rolling
to your pack. Yes, where's your pack? Wrap your pack and clean your
and do a rock and roll.
boots. And tidy up your roll.
Let's have the title of the poem, which is very easy.
Tommy Atkins.
All right. 3 again, I think, out of 4. Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that and Tommy how's your soul, but it's thin red line of heroes when the drums begin to roll, and it's Tommy or Tommy Atkins by Rudyard Kipling. Now, Frank Muir, if of all words of tongue and pen the saddest are, it might have been, more sad are these we daily see.
Things are not what they used to be.
You're very nearly right.
And I very nearly get 3 marks there.
Author?
No, it doesn't spring readily to mind, Jack.
Transatlantic, gentlemen.
Emerson, no, not...
No, 1 out of 4. If of all words of tongue and pen the saddest are it might have been, more sad are those we daily see, it is but hadn't ought to be. You've probably nearly got that bit. And it's by Bret Harte in a poem, for reasons best known to him, called Mrs. Judge Jenkins. 1 out of 4, I think. The next round's about origins and derivations. 3 marks if I am given the present meaning, and then am given the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Beginning with Dilys Powell, the Louvre, L-O-U-V-R-E, the Louvre.
Well, we keep the V-R-E on the end. The Louvre is now a museum, a national gallery in Paris.
Yes. What was it before it was a portrait gallery or picture gallery?
Palace.
Yes.
It had sort of special windows, which were called louvres.
Or louvres.
Or louvres.
2.5, I think. Bit of help there. Right. The former royal palace of the French kings, and since then, as Dilys Powell quite rightly says, the greater part of it, though not the whole of it, has been used as a national museum and art gallery. But the more likely explanation is that in medieval times in Paris, when Paris was a very much smaller town, it was always in winter beleaguered by hungry wolves, and the main route in to the town, along which the food carts came, was past this palace of the Louvre, and the wolves sort of sat up and waited, and sometimes ate the food, and sometimes ate the chaps who were accompanying the food. And if you will remember, although the masculine for a man wolf is Lou, the female wolf is Louvre, L-O-U-V-E. So this is the place where the wolves waited up for you.
Female ones.
Female ones. 2.5. Denis Norden, Doch and Doris.
Well, Doch and Doris is what you have afore ye gang a war.
Yes.
Whatever that is. It's a kind of one for the road.
Yes, absolutely right. And do you know what it...
No, I know that... I think Doris is a Scottish word for door.
Yes, that's it.
We used to call doors Doris. A doch, I suppose, is a... I wonder if it would be like a dash.
Yes.
A dash of spirit or something.
That's it. It's, of course, one of Harry Lauder's most famous songs. It's the final drink before saying goodnight, one for the road, the sort of thing the Minister of Transport doesn't much like. And the Gaelic originally means Dioch and Doris, a drink at the door. So Denis got it quite right. 3 marks. And Scott James, Jerusalem artichokes.
Well, it's the kind of artichoke which grows at the end of a long stalk.
Yes.
In an exquisite lily-shaped form. And believe it or not, it used to grow in, near and around Jerusalem.
No.
Must have something to do with Jerusalem.
None at all. Nothing whatever.
No.
Well, come on, let's think of some marvellous French derivation.
It's a kind of sunflower. It has a long stalk, as we said. And it's nothing whatever to do with Jerusalem, which is just a corruption of the word girasole, or girasol, which simply means a plant that turns round as the sun turns. Now, Frank Muir, anathema.
anathema is a sort of thickness where you have difficulty in getting drawing your breath. Also, it's, or used to be, what? Come on. Didn't it used to be an abomination against the gods?
Yes, it can mean that.
It was something quite extraordinary.
Yes.
It's a Greek word.
Yes.
It's a Greek word.
Can you remember the...
Well bowled.
Very
Yes.
good, yes. Now,
Can you remember the verb it comes from, Dilys?
Anathemi.
Yes.
Just
Absolutely right.
Speak down.
Yes.
It's,
The original verb meant just to dedicate or devote. And it originally started off devoting something to God or to the church. And later on, still the same thing. When sailors got wrecked, they would hang up their wet clothes because they were so pleased that God had delivered them. Or cripples hung up their crutches when they recovered the use of their legs again. And even retired workmen would sometimes hang up their sort of work basket of tools inside it. And then it came to mean devoted to bad, that is, accursed of the church or accursed of God. But to start with, it hadn't got that bad sense attached to it. 1.5. And now we come to the who, why, how, and what department. 2 marks for correct answers. Dilys Powell, of what was Charles Lamb writing when he said, "It's a pistol let off at the ear, not a feather to tickle the intellect"?
Somebody's book.
No, it's a particular...
An object.
Not object, no.
An object. Yeah,
what was going on during
really?
the Lamb's time?
Yes.
It was about 1840 or something.
Oh, a bit earlier, no.
Or maybe if it's a young lamb.
No? Come on. It's a pun.
Yes.
A pun. No marks. Denis Norden, of whom was Leigh Hunt writing when he said, "This Adonis in loveliness was a corpulent man of 50.
Well, just simply going from who's your fat friend.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Well, the only corpulent person who kind of sticks out during that era is the Prince Regent.
Yes. Well done. Get your 2 marks. It was Leigh Hunt, this Adonis in loveliness was a corpulent man of 50, referring to the Prince Regent, who afterwards became George IV, in a magazine called The Examiner in 1812. But he did it once too often, because next year, 1813, he and his brother were both sentenced to 2 years' imprisonment for making nasty remarks about the Prince Regent in their paper. Anne Scott James, in his nonsense novels, Stephen Leacock wrote, "Lord Ronald said nothing. He flung himself from the room, flung himself on his horse, and where did he ride?"
Oh, well.
I don't know, where did you ride?
Well, Frank and I have rather stake in this because we once did a programme with Peter Ustinov which had this title, "He Rode Off Madly in All Directions."
Well done, you get your 2 marks again. Nonsense novels, the one called Gertrude the Governess. Now, Frank Muir, who, in reply to what question, replied, "Ignorance, madam, pure ignorance"?
Latter half of the 18th century, at a party just after Dr. Johnson's dictionary had been published, a lady said, "Why did you describe a horse's pastern in your dictionary as a horse's knee?" And he replied, "Ignorance, madam, ignorance."
Well done, Frank. 2 very well-earned marks. And now we come to the last round and go back to those 2 quotations I gave the teams earlier in the programme. For 2 marks, Dilys Powell, can you give me the origin of your quotation? "He jests at scars that never felt a wound."
It's by William Shakespeare.
Yes.
It comes in Romeo and Juliet.
Yes. Do you remember who said it?
Romeo.
He did, quite right. Well done. Now, Anne Scott James, the origin of your quotation, "Rather bear those ills we know than fly to others we know not of."
Oh, it's Hamlet.
Yes.
By Hamlet.
By Hamlet, yes.
Not of.
Written by William Shakespeare.
Yes.
And it's the to be or not to be
Quite right.
speech.
And now I'm going to ask Frank and Denis to give me their explanation of how these quotations came into being. And on this occasion, the marks will go to whichever incredible explanation receives the longer amount of applause from the audience here in the theatre. So back to Frank Muir. He jests at scars that never felt a wound.
Well, I remember thinking, what am I going to get for Christmas this year? And I rather thought what I'd get. I had an idea it would either be a first edition of C.P. Snow's novel, The Masters, or a model of Liverpool Street Railway Station, made out of used postage stamps. I just had a feeling I was going to get one of those. I didn't, actually. You know what I got for Christmas? Virus pneumonia. It wasn't all I got for Christmas, obviously, you know. I also got pleurisy as well. When I semi-recovered from this little lot, the doctor said to me, you've got to give up smoking cigarettes. And this didn't worry me at all. Not a bit. I'm used to giving things up. I've given up all sorts of things in my time. I used to always have to walk on the intersections between paving stones. But I gave that up. Now I just walk very carefully, so that I always step on the paving stone and never touch one of the lines. I conquered that. But really, giving up cigarettes is quite different. It needs a positive attitude of mind. That's all it is. It's a simple attitude of mind. I will give up cigarettes, you say to yourself. It's equivalent to saying, I'll cut my foot off. Perfectly simple. All you've then got to do is do it. Oh, it was horrible. Absolutely terrible. I can't tell you that period. It was absolutely awful. So I went back to the specialist, and I said, look, I don't think I can give cigarettes. I've tried and tried. And he said, well, you've only been to the front door and back. He said, you can smoke those cigar things. They're perfectly all right. So I tried smoking cigars. They're terrible things. Very laughter inculcating. You know, those big cigars are like sort of burnt bananas. I tried the small ones first, those little sort of half little things, you know. They always go out halfway through. I could not keep them going. They just go out halfway. I was a victim of midwifery. So I moved on to the big ones. Well, I couldn't light the big ones to start with, because unlike the small ones, the big ones have only got a hole one end, you know. It took me quite a while to appreciate this. And I couldn't make the hole, because my front teeth don't join in the middle. It's held me back. I can't eat corn on the cob. And I couldn't bite the bit off the end. And if you cut it with a rather blunt penknife, the whole cigar sort of gently unwraps. You know, it's got a sort of brown piece of paper on the outside which unwraps and leaves in your hand rather like that wrinkly chocolate stuff, a sort of flaky chocolate. It was terrible, and you get a mouthful of sort of dead cabbage. Absolutely awful. So I thought, well, really the thing to do is to combine the two, is to have some sort of long, thin cigar which will keep going. Now, a pipe keeps going, and you don't get bits in your mouth. So if there was some way of incorporating cigar tobacco with a long, thin pipe. And then one day, by sheer chance, I was in a magic shop. I'd actually gone in, that sells jokes and things, I'd gone in to buy one of those squirting buttonholes. They're ones carnations which squirt water. Because you know what it's like when you're on the railway station and your train is about 8 minutes to go, and you go in for a cup of coffee, and the coffee's always too hot. So what I do is I just lean forward gently and give it a squirt of cold water. And while I was buying this squirting carnation, I suddenly saw a magic wand. It was an ordinary common or garden magic wand, black with white ends, and the ends come off, and the black bit is long, thin, and hollow. You're meant to stuff up it coloured handkerchiefs and doves and rabbits and fried eggs and cakes and things, and then produce them to amaze and mystify your friends. Any number can enjoy it. So it suddenly occurred to me that if I bought this magic wand and unrolled a cigar and stuffed it down, and then if I carved with my slightly blunt penknife a mouthpiece, rather like a pipe mouthpiece, I might well have the answer. And you know, I smoked that ever since. So don't in future, like I did originally, mock cigars, as Shakespeare himself said. He jests at cigars that never filled a wand.
Well, I think we're all very happy that Frank survived. And now we go on to Denis Norden. And if you remember, his quotation was, "Rather bear those ills we know and fly to others we know not of."
Well, I'm asking you to join me tonight in a campaign. You have just heard, Jack has just quoted, one of the show-stopping bits from Hamlet's hit soliloquy, "To be or not to be." Now, I'd remind you that later on in that same hit show, there is another line which says, "Whereto serves mercy but to confront the visage of offence." To offend, at the time when Hamlet was pacing the windy battlements of Elsinore, to offend meant to murder a boy's father, or to break 8 out of the 10 commandments. Now let us think what to offend means today. It means to use the wrong kind of soap. All over television, all over the underground, every paper you pick up, you have this insistent voice that says, "Do you offend?" Take that poor girl in that television commercial who comes out of a ballroom with beads of moisture on her brow, and her mate immediately rushes over and hisses at her that she should use a deodorant. Surely it would have been much simpler if she just told her to dance slower. And the word deodorant, you see, what I'm getting at is the word deodorant itself is a fraud. See, to deodor should mean to take the odor away. But that's not what a deodorant does. A deodorant takes the odor away and replaces it with another odor, which is worse. I mean, you've seen those things they have for getting rid of kitchen smells. You buy one, and suppose you have your kitchen smelling like someone has just been boiling cabbage. So you take one of these canned things and you press it all around, and what happens? Your kitchen now smells like someone has been stewing carnations. I put you there. There is nothing to choose, and it's creeping up on us. And the trouble is, you see, that these deodorants are getting larger. Anybody who's got a bathroom shelf will know that. They're beginning to take over from the aspirins and things like that. They are larger in themselves. There is now a 1-gallon tin of spray deodorant. Can you imagine the power that there is stored up within a gallon? One false move in the morning, you could blow your arm off. That is why I am asking you all tonight, stamp out these unnatural perfumes, these unknown pongs. Genius is supposed to be 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. Let's keep it that way, and as Hamlet said in the A-side of his hit, rather bear those smells we know than fly to odours we know not of.
Well, that was splendid. By your vote, nevertheless, Frank Muir just wins the contest of the 2 stories, but the entire programme, putting all the questions together, is won by the team of Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, and that brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Frank Muir and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC. The BBC presents My Word. And here to introduce the programme and the panel is Jack Longland.
My Word is a word game played by people whose business is words, and those taking part are Anne Scott James, Dilys Powell, and Denis Norden. And most unluckily, Frank Muir is indisposed, but in this programme, his place will be taken by Lionel Hale, whom we welcome this evening. And we go straight away into round one to test the team's vocabulary. 2 marks if they get the meanings of these words approximately right. We begin with Anne Scott James. Anne, what is a parachronism? P-A-R-A-C-H-R-O-N-I-S-M, parachronism.
Well, it's something to do with time.
Yes?
Para means in the opposite direction.
Roughly.
Or against.
That's better.
I should think it's an error of time. Wrong clock, bad time, wrong time.
Absolutely right. It's an error in chronology, usually by putting the date of things too late. 2 marks, well done. Lionel Hale, and nothing personal intended here, what is a dastard?
Well, that is what one might loosely call a poltroon or coward, usually in a military connection.
Yes, I think that'll do splendidly. 2 marks it is. It's a mean-spirited person, a coward, especially somebody who commits some brutality without endangering himself at all. A very nasty character indeed. Now, Dilys Powell, what is the meaning of velutinous? V-E-L-U-T-I-N-O-U-S, velutinous.
Well, there's some kind of a dish which is called a velouté, which is supposed to slip down rather smoothly, I believe.
Yes, we're getting there.
It's kind of velvety.
Yes. You're sticking around there?
Absolutely velvety. Not kind of. Completely velvety.
Velutinous means velvety, not only with dishes, but in the botanical or entomological sense, you might say that a butterfly's wing was velvety in that sense. Denis Norden, what is an aurelave? A-U-R-I-L-A-V-E, aurelave.
Oh, dear. Well, aurel, A-U-R,
yes,
it's something to do with hearing.
Yes, quite right.
Which leaves us with L-A-V-E.
Yeah.
Well, it would be, aurelave would be the name that you'd give to that type of building where the walls are so thin you can hear the people next door pulling the chain.
You're almost there, Denis. It's something that you tell your children to do every morning, I'm sure.
Get up.
Lave means to wash.
To wash. It's an...
Not brainwashing, ear-washing.
It's an ear bath, like an eye bath, only rather more harp-shaped than an ear bath.
Yes, I think that'll do. It's an instrument for cleaning ears. And ladies and gentlemen, they really do exist. I came back once from Tibet with a sort of chatelaine with all sorts of toilet instruments, of which one was a nasty little thing for cleaning out the insides of your ears. So they do exist. That's an aurelave. We go on to Anne Scott James and ask, what is a queening? Q-U-E-E-N-I-N-G. Queening.
Is it a bee thing?
No. A bee comes in possibly at a much earlier stage. But the thing mightn't happen if there weren't some bees about sometime.
Look at how she's carrying on. She's queening it over her inferiors. It means...
I think that's absolutely right.
Yes, she's being supercilious, superior.
Think about codlings.
Think about codlings. There's an injunction for you.
It's a small bee.
I bet you tried to help
pack it in.
No good at all. It's a kind of apple, as a codling also is. All right, Lionel Hale. What are derbies?
Do you wish to put up your derbies?
I wouldn't know how to do that, frankly.
Well, I think that's good old slang for put up your fists.
Think about the wrists.
Yes, it's handcuffs.
Well, as you gave me an alternative explanation, which may well be right, though I didn't know it, I'll give you your 2 marks. Derbies are handcuffs. Origin is very doubtful, but the great Frank Partridge says that there was a particularly rigid form of moneylender's bond, which was called Father Derby's bands. I'll leave you with that. Now, Dilys Powell, what's the meaning of no dose?
No dose. So it's when you don't take your medicine.
Well, it might be. Yeah. All sorts of things might happen to you like this.
Or else it could mean naughty.
It does mean naughty, and it could mean naughty, and I entirely agree with you. 2 marks, naughty or knobbed. Now, Denis Norden, what is obmutescence?
Obmutescence. Well, mutescence would be something to do with growing silent.
Yes?
Which leaves us with ob. Well, ob is, it's OB, which is the abbreviation for outside broadcast. So obmutescence would be an outside broadcast where the microphone didn't work.
As we have too frequently.
Yes, we have encountered this, yeah.
All right, I'll give you 2 marks, curiously enough, because that, I think, is what the microphone would be doing. Obmutescence means obstinate silence. We go on to round 2, which is legends and myths, and 3 marks for correct answers, beginning with Anne Scott James. And who was Marsyas, Marsyas? Who was Marsyas, and what happened to him?
Well, he was torn to pieces.
Not quite.
Well, came to
well, he either ate somebody or was eaten or married a near relative.
That's right. Or was stabbed and gashed.
This is the nastiest kind of striptease.
He was flayed.
Yes, he was.
Yes, Marsyas was flayed.
Yes, I think we've got a certain amount of help there, and I think half a mark would be reasonably adequate. Marsyas was a Phrygian Silenus or satyr who picked up a flute which had been invented but afterwards chucked away by the goddess Athene, because when she played it, it made her face go all wrong. I mean, it distorted her features. And he learnt to play it, and very unwisely challenged the great god of music, Apollo, who's god of the lyre, and on the condition that the victor should do whatever he liked with the vanquished. And the Muses, who are the right sort of jury to have, judged the contest and judged that Marsyas had lost, and Apollo, and this is the nasty bit of the story, flayed Marsyas alive. And now, Lionel Hale, who was Merope? M-E-R-O-P-E.
She was the mother of somebody.
Rather unwillingly, I think.
Oh, she must be one of those nymphs that they were always being chased around, those nymphs.
Not very chaste, those nymphs.
I bet she was chaste.
I think Merope is one of those muses whom you never know.
Look up into the sky. She has 6 sisters.
I beg your
Try one of the Pleiades.
One of the Pleiades?
Yes.
Oh! You didn't know that, did you?
No, I don't.
One, I think. Merope was the daughter of Atlas and the wife of Sisyphus, that old stone roller-upper, and she became one of the Pleiades, but she was a rather odd one. She was identified with the faintest of the alleged 7 stars in the constellation, because she was said always to be hiding her face as though a goddess. She'd had the misfortune to marry a mortal, so she was a bit sort of shy about that. 1 out of 3. Dilys Powell, who was Polyxena, And what happened to her?
Oh, now, Polyxena was somebody's daughter.
Yes?
The daughter of somebody in the Trojan War.
Yes?
Now, which one? Priam's daughter.
Priam. You got it right. Yes. Now, what happened?
Yes.
Do you remember?
She was married off something she didn't want to marry.
Yes, yes. 2 out of 3. She was the daughter of King Priam and Hecuba of Troy, and she fell to the share of Achilles' son Neoptolemus when the women were, as it were, shared out at the sack of Troy. But Achilles had been her fiancé before, and he was already dead, and he appeared as a ghost, and was so cross about all this that he demanded her sacrifice, and so the Greeks put her to death on Achilles' own funeral pyre. So the poor girl came to a very sticky end, 2 marks out of 3. Denis Norden, who was Telephus? I think it is Telephus and not Telephus.
I don't know. Telephus is the god of trunk calls. I don't know. There's always such involved answers to these. There's not a chance that you can just hit on it, you know.
No, he had sufferings, I think.
Yes, he suffered. No,
I think it's a jolly hard one, I must say,
you will have
Dennis.
guessed I don't know.
I don't think I can give you any marks. He was a son of Hercules, or Heracles. He was wounded in the thigh by Achilles, and then was told by an oracle that nobody could cure the wound except the chaps who had inflicted it. And so he went to the Greek camp, which was very much bogged down on the mainland of Greece, trying to get to Troy across the sea, because they'd had contrary winds. And he managed there to meet another useful oracle, who'd said that nobody except Telephus could show the Greeks the way to Troy. And he wasn't going to go there unless his wound was healed. So Achilles healed the wound, and this is a very odd way of healing wounds, by wiping onto the wound the rust from the spear which had caused it in the first place, which suggests that Achilles didn't keep his weapons in very good order. And then he did take him across the sea to the other side, but he refused to fight with them, for them, when he got there.
That. We'd have got 3 marks, you nit.
Yes, I would probably have hit on that eventually. It's pretty obvious now, you come to mention it.
The next round's a gastronomical round. 2 marks. What would you expect to be eating if you had the following, and in what country? Beginning with Anne Scott James. Gazpacho. Gaspacho.
It's a very, very delicious cold soup which you will get in Spain, and it's made of tomatoes and onions and various other spicy things.
Well done. You'll get your 2 marks straight away.
And cucumber.
Yes, that's even better.
You serve it well chilled.
I can't give you a bonus mark, but it's a cold soup of cucumber, peppers, tomatoes, oil, vinegar, and I think slices of bread, and you get it in Spain. Now, Lionel Hale, what is conejo a la gallega? Conejo a la gallega.
Well, this is a little rabbit.
Yes, that's a good start. Very.
In the manner of Gallega. How I think back to the dear old days when old Gallega used to cook me Gallega in the Galician manner.
Yes. Well, yes, I think it's probably true.
It's rabbit or hare, a little rabbit, spring rabbit. You know, it's painful to think of. In the manner of the people of Galicia.
Boiled, roast, or fried?
You didn't ask. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. You know, I knew all about gazpacho. I could make gazpacho.
Just
they don't fry very well.
Yes?
They don't fry very well.
Fried. I can take a hint.
Conejo a la gallega is fried rabbit with onions and potatoes, and you find it in Spain. Now, Dilys Powell, bœuf à la mode.
B-O-E-U-F.
Yes.
La M-O-D-E. Well, it's beef.
Yes, that's a start.
It's beef, done very fashionably. You get it in Chelsea. It isn't roast, and
No.
it isn't fried.
No, it's in between
It's
the
a
two.
kind of stew. You fry it first, and then you stew it with
Yes, and country of origin, which is rather simple.
France.
Yes, I think you're all right there. Bœuf à la mode is braised beef and vegetables, and you find it in France. Denis Norden, Blutwurst. B-L-U-T-W-U-R-S-T, Blutwurst.
Well, that's German. No, it could be Austrian.
Yes?
Actually.
Either.
Blutwurst. Wurst is a kind of sausage.
Mm-hmm.
Blut is blood, isn't it? Oh, golly. It's a blood sausage.
Black pud, yes.
Yes, it's like black pudding, yeah.
That's it. Absolutely right.
It's a kind of, yes, Teutonic black pudding.
German version of black pudding, Blutwurst, or blood sausage. Next round is the who, why, and what department. 2 marks for correct answers. And Scott James, who are known as tricoteurs?
Oh, well, it means the knitters.
Yes.
And they were the old hags at the French Revolution who sat and knitted while the guillotine went chop, chop, chop.
Yes. Yes, that's just about right. They also attended meetings of the convention, I think, and they went on knitting, however terrible the decisions of the convention were, but a small and much selecter band of them sat at the foot of the guillotine and watched the heads roll into the basket and still went on with their knitting. Tricoteurs.
Let's really drop one.
Lionel Hale, who said in his diary, and I emphasize diary, I saw Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, played, but now the old plays begin to disgust this refined age.
The one that leaps to mind, as they say, and probably misses it, is Pepys.
He wasn't easily disgusted.
Evelyn.
Yes?
Well, I'm doing
Evelyn's
well.
diary, go on.
Evelyn's diary, yes, sir.
Yes.
1.5. I gave you a bit of help. This is written in November 1661 by the English diarist John Evelyn, and it's a bit odd to find that at that stage Shakespeare was beginning to be vulgar. Now, Dilys Powell, who said, "You ain't heard nothing yet, folks"?
An American.
Yes.
Somebody in the movies.
Yes.
You know, the chap who did the Blackham work.
Yes.
Yes. Oh.
Al Jolson.
Yes, Al Jolson.
All right, You Ain't Heard Nothing Yet, folks, was Al Jolson in the first ever talking film, The Jazz Singer, in July 1927. Denis Norden, who said or wrote, "You must consider every man your enemy who speaks ill of your king, and you must hate a Frenchman as you hate the devil"?
That wasn't Al Jolson. Oh. Was it a politician?
No.
Oh. You must hate a French. Was it somebody who was fighting the French?
Yes, that's right.
Napoleonic
Yes,
era,
yes,
period.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes, quite right. Well done. 2 marks it is. Well done. You must consider every man your enemy who speaks ill of your king, and you must hate a Frenchman as you hate the devil. This is Nelson, as quoted by Southey in his Life of Nelson, and it comes out of Nelson's memoir of his services. 2 marks. Well done. The next round is initials and abbreviations. 2 marks if you know what these represent. Beginning with Anne Scott James, E-R-A. On the high seas, but a bit shut in.
On the high seas, but a bit shut in.
On the high seas. The questions are easier than the hints.
This is the point. And the worst thing of all is when Dilys makes helpful mime over there, and I just watch her and I don't concentrate. Something tells me something to do with the Atlantic.
No.
No, I don't think we're going to get it somehow.
All right, try to help. It's engine room artificer.
Oh, really? Really?
Really?
Lionel Hale, H-C.
Hot and cold.
No. That's H and C, and those are small letters usually in most advertisements. These are both capital letters. H,
Capital
full
letters.
stop, C,
H,
full
C.
stop.
Habeas corpus.
I think I'll give you that. I didn't know it, but I think that's perfectly good. It's normally the abbreviation used for the House of Commons, but habeas corpus... I'm sure in the rather refined legal circles in which Dilys moves, it's also habeas corpus, so we're probably all right. Now,
Can you imagine somebody saying he invoked the ancient law of HC? I don't think this is legitimate.
now, Dilys Powell, and these are lowercase or small letters, CP, C dot, P dot.
So it's not Communist Party then?
No,
No. Compare.
that's without a dot between the C and the P. Think about electricity.
Current.
Current permitting.
Oh, yes.
I think it's perfectly splendid. I'll give you 1 mark for having CP as compare. Without the dots, it's perfectly true. But C dot, P dot, small letters, is candle power. And now, Denis Norden, in capitals this time, H, H, H.
It's 3 television aerials. H, H, H. Happy home, yeah.
You must have
Happy
got. You must have got in for a drawing examination at some stage, didn't you?
Drawing examination. All they get so cryptic. HHH, to do with drawing, art.
Just means you've got very bad marks, I think.
No.
No. The audience knows it, isn't it?
Yes. you
Some
can
of the
see-
younger ones certainly will, I think.
Yeah? Well, at least talk louder.
Dennis, what
Pencil. Yes.
Yes, that's
Thank
it.
you.
Triple
What
mark.
kind
You
of
are
Yes,
clever.
it's a very hard pencil. It is, yeah.
Difficult to mark because he got a lot of help.
Yeah. Thank you.
1 out of
That's
2.
none of your business.
HHH is a triple or treble hard pencil. It refers to the quality of the lead. And now we come to the last round, which in this particular program is about origins and derivations. 3 marks for defining the present meaning and then giving the origin and derivation of these words or expressions or phrases. Beginning with Anne Scott James. Anne, what's the phrase mean, to cut one's comb? C-O-M-B.
That's an everyday phrase.
Yes, all the time. Oh, drat, I cut my comb this morning.
You must cut your comb according to your hair.
Put it a bit slightly different. I'll cut his comb for him.
Coxcomb. I should think that if somebody's getting a bit uppish and you
Yes.
want to take them down a peg, you say, I'll cut his comb for him.
That's right. Yes,
And everybody says, how
And
could
it's,
her?
very
and the derivation is from the dunghill. A cock crowing on the dunghill. You must remember all that. Shakespeare.
And why did
or
that-
Wordsworth or somebody. Do you think his virility rests in his comb? Or it's a sign of
Yes,
that,
that's right.
is it
That'll
not?
do. It's good enough, that. Cutting somebody's comb is to take them down a peg or two, humiliate them, put them in their place. And there are 2 possible allusions here. One is that caponized cockbirds had their combs cut in addition, a sort of double deprivation, helping to turn them into more feminine, therefore rather better for eating poultry. But it also happened in cockfighting. Sometimes they cut the combs of the fighting cocks, I think, so that the other chap couldn't get hold of them and knock them out.
It's actually a triple deprivation.
Now, Lionel Hale. To cut and run. Present meaning and derivation.
Well, it's a shifty manoeuvre. You're not proud of getting away.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine, like so much else in this island, it has to do with maritime stuff.
It does? Quite right. And
And
what particular
disagrees
maritime
with.
action?
Well, obviously, you cut the rigging down. No, you wouldn't. You want it up. You want to get away, you cut the anchor. No, you can't
Yes,
cut the
cut the
anchor.
rope,
cut the
It's
rope,
made of
yes.
steel.
You cut the rope to the anchor.
You cut the cable.
That's
Cut
it.
the cable.
Well done, Lionel. You fought your way home. 2 marks. To cut and run is to get out of a tricky situation as quickly as you possibly can, and it is a sea phrase when the weather started to blow up or there was some other danger. If it looked terribly bad, the thing to do was to cut your cable and at the same time lose your anchor, which is a naughty thing to do, and to run before the wind. 2 marks. Now, Dilys Powell. Coup d'etat.
Coup d'etat means a kind of sudden blow of success, a sudden action,
Yes, but d'etat.
a state action, a political action.
Yes, I want it a little more narrowly defined than that, Dilys.
It's a sudden action on the part of a government or a non-government.
Yes. Yep. And is it,
Gives you a choice.
Yes, you're getting there. And is this terribly legal?
Well, yes, it is really. I was in Greece once in 1936 when somebody called Metaxas executed a coup d'etat, and one got up one morning and the streets were full of tanks and police, and the government had been changed.
And was that
It was a coup d'etat.
Was it a very legal way?
No, not really, no.
Right.
No.
That's what I wanted. That's roughly what I wanted, Dilys. It's a sudden change in the political affairs of a country, usually affected by unconstitutional or illegal means. It can be done by the government. It takes more power than it ought to have, or it can be done by the opposition, which throws out the government. 2 marks. And now, Denis Norden, cupboard love.
Well, that means when your affection for somebody is determined by what they can give you.
And by origin?
And by origin...
Oh, Mother Hubbard, I should think, was good as anything.
I knew somebody in a party once who was playing hide and seek, and they hid in a cupboard. This chap, and there was a young lady already in there. And the door got locked, and they couldn't get out. They were there for 3 days, and the vicar had to come and marry them through the key. But I don't think that's the derivation.
No, not quite.
I think Mother Hubbard would be near.
Yes, but...
The dog's love for Mother Hubbard was cupboard love.
Yes.
Well, surely it's when you affect love for anybody for what you can
For what they've
get
got
out
in
of
their-
their little cupboard.
In their cupboard,
Yes, that's it. Yes, because the dog didn't do awfully well in Mother Hubbard, if you remember.
That is true.
No, but he didn't know he wasn't going to do well.
No, I
he was
think that's fair.
expressing...
He was, yes, he had love beforehand, but not afterwards.
Yes, exactly.
All right, 2 marks it is. It's interested affection, love simulated for the sake of what you can get out of it, and it comes usually from the love of small children given to some indulgent adult, either a parent or somebody else, who gives them something nice out of her cupboard. 2 marks. And that brings us to a final score in which Dilys Powell and Lionel Hale win by 1.5 marks from Anne Scott James and Denis Norden, and it also brings to an end this edition of My Word.
In My Word, you heard Dilys Powell, Anne Scott James, Lionel Hale and Denis Norden, introduced by Jack Longland. The programme was devised by Tony Shryan and Edward J. Mason and presented by the BBC.